Well, I thank all of our nominees for their statements. Mr. Rosenblum, Kazakhstan has been a steadfast partner with the United States on a number of issues, from our use of its spaceport for our astronauts to access the International Space Station, to its commitment to protect our personnel and consulate during political unrest in Almaty. However, Kazakhstan has thus far taken a neutral stance on Ukraine, declining to support either side in this war of Russian aggression. Kazakhstan's commitment of humanitarian aid to Ukraine, as well as its additional defense spending, indicate anxiety about Russian geopolitical ambitions. This is despite continuing military partnership per media reporting on Kazakhstan's participation in upcoming Russian military exercises. Sir, what steps would you take to encourage Kazakhstan to take more decisive steps to counter Russian aggression?
Senator Young, thank you for that question. It will definitely be at the center of my attention, as it is for all of us now, the effects of the war in Ukraine in the region. First of all, I want to say that our support, as I mentioned in my statement, for Kazakhstan's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence has been consistent and remains strong, and that will be an organizing principle of everything I do in Kazakhstan, if confirmed. Secondly, we do recognize the reality of Kazakhstan's geographical and historical and economic position in the region. They share a 4,700-mile border with Russia. Russia is their main trading partner, main source of investment, and that is a reality that they have to deal with. As you pointed out, Kazakhstan has remained neutral in the conflict with respect to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and at the same time have stated publicly and clearly that they will not recognize the independence of the so-called Lugansk and Donetsk republics. They've also stated publicly that they will do everything in their power to not undermine the sanctions regime against Russia, and have worked very closely with us to make sure that they don't cross that line. And they've also said that they will not support the deployment of any Kazakhstani troops through the Collective Security Treaty Organization, with Russian-led alliance that they belong to, military group. So all of those things we take as positive steps. And if confirmed, when I go, I will reinforce that, the importance of them remaining at a minimum neutral, and also reinforce what the Kazakhstani leadership itself has said, which is they recognize they're too dependent on Russia, especially for their trade and their oil exports, and need to diversify. And anything we can do to help them diversify, we will.
Well, sir, I think you've done a very good job of contextualizing the diplomatic and economic and other challenges the country faces on account of its geography and history and other factors. So I do think that it's a positive. You laid out many positives, and perhaps that's something we can build on as well as it relates to the situation in Ukraine. How would you ensure further, sir, that Kazakhstan does not fall into China's sphere of influence as it seeks closer ties with other nations?
So again, there are realities that Kazakhstan faces with respect to China, and China is a very important source of investment in their oil and gas sector, one of their major trading partners. At the same time, Kazakhstan practices, and they publicly declare, what they call multi-vector diplomacy. And multi-vector to them means that they have to maintain important relationships and mutually beneficial relations with lots of partners, not just Russia, not just China, the United States, Europe. They want all of that to be part of the picture. So if confirmed, my goal would be to help them in their own goal, to reach their own goal of strengthening these other vectors. We can do that in a number of ways, including by promoting a better investment climate in Kazakhstan so that more U.S. investment in business can enter and they can diversify their trading relationships. We can also, with respect to oil in particular, oil and gas, have them diversify from their heavy dependence on that sector of their economy, because it's the oil and gas that especially ties them closely both to Russia and China, both for export routes and, in the case of China, as a customer. So, so there's a number of ways that we can work on that. I'm committed, if confirmed, to doing so. And the important thing, I think, here is that it's the Kazakhstanis' own goal, that is, we are helping them to achieve their own goal of not being overly dependent on their neighbors.
Well, thank you much, Mr. Rosenblum. From one stand to another, Mr. Hennick, you've been nominated to be our ambassador to Uzbekistan. As it relates to the Ukraine crisis, the State Department has repeatedly engaged the Central Asian governments this year to reaffirm U.S. support for Uzbek independence and territorial integrity, as well as the C5+1 strategic partnership. Secretary Blinken reiterated the administration's position during Foreign Minister Kamalov, his visit to Washington in March, while also condemning Russia's unprovoked actions in Ukraine. I note that Tashkent registered businesses have recently been hit by sanctions for engagement with Russian entities on the Treasury Department's sanctions list. If confirmed, how would you encourage our Uzbek partners to avoid such dealings, as well as take a stronger stance against Russian aggression?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. Uzbekistan finds itself, I think, in a very similar situation to Kazakhstan. They don't have the luxury of simply being able to, cut off their relationship with Russia, with which Russia remains their largest trading partner, major investor, obviously historical, cultural ties. At the same time, Uzbekistan has proven to be a strong partner of the United States and has been sensitive to the concerns that we have expressed, certainly about Russian aggression. And I think, Senator, as you mentioned in your opening statement, there is a reassessment going on in the region about their relationship with Russia in light of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And so we've found that we are having a productive dialogue with the government of Uzbekistan. I think the key going forward will be to be as cooperative and transparent as possible about the nature and the specifics of the sanctions that we're levying, to hear from the Uzbeks about which of these sanctions, if any, are very difficult or impossible for them to comply with, and to, when necessary, as you have pointed out, Senator, to designate companies that are in violation of those sanctions, to send a clear message to other private sector entities in Uzbekistan about the dangers of doing business with Russia. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Viguerie, COVID-19 and economic sanctions have battered the Russian economy, presenting an opportunity to encourage Central Asian countries to rethink their relationships with Moscow. As their governments warm to the idea of greater regional integration and partnerships with the U.S., the door may also be open to exploitation by other actors, particularly China. How would you characterize the Kyrgyz reaction to U.S. engagement on this issue, particularly as we also call on the host nation to respect human rights and freedom of expression?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Kyrgyzstan is in an unusual position. Many of the factors that my two colleagues outlined also hold true for Kyrgyzstan, but in addition, Kyrgyzstan relies for about a third of its economy on remittances from Russia. So that has a colossal economic impact on Kyrgyzstan. The jury's still out on how much of an influence the Russian economic situation is going to have on those remittances. I take your point on China. China owns about a third of or more of Kyrgyzstan's debt, so it too exercises a huge amount of economic influence on the country. The United States has been very active in engaging Kyrgyzstan to participate in regional organizations. Some, through our assistance, organize electrical transmission through Kerem and CASA 1000. Others support general connectivity. There's an interest in Kyrgyzstan in pursuing these opportunities, but there is a concern in Kyrgyzstan about their two big neighbors as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you to all the nominees who've spoken to these issues. I've learned quite a bit about that region just in your presentations today. So thank you. I'll look forward to, should you be confirmed, to working with all of you on some of these challenges. Mr. Talwar, as you know, I was one of the lead co-sponsors of the Israel Normalization Act to strengthen and expand normalization between Israel and a number of countries in the region, including Morocco. I was encouraged to see other countries also begin taking baby steps toward fully integrating Israel into the regional framework, such as Riyadh's recent approval of Israeli use of Saudi airspace for commercial overflights. Do you consider the Abraham Accords to be a success that we should endeavor to build upon? And do you believe it's in the United States' interest to see other countries pursue normalization with Israel?
Senator, thanks very much for the question. I believe that the answer is yes. I believe that the Abraham Accords have put us on the cusp of a potentially historic transformation in the region. And as it relates to Morocco and Israel, that relationship is going full bore. And you have seen literally dozens of memorandums of understanding signed between the two countries in sectors ranging from agriculture to energy to supply chains. Just yesterday, there were two ministers in Rabat from Israel who signed an agreement on judicial and legal cooperation. And if confirmed, this is going to be one of my highest priorities, I think working in two dimensions. First, to help buttress and support in any way we can and consistent with the law that you mentioned, the Israel Normalization Act, Israel Relations Normalization Act, to see what we can do to support the further building out and cementing of that relationship. And then second, there's the regional dimension that you referenced, to connect us to the Negev Forum so that we can expand the circle of peace and so that people throughout the regions begin to see and feel the tangible benefits of peace with Israel.
Thank you. So just so you'll be encouraging, should you be confirmed, the Moroccan government to, in turn, encourage other African and Middle Eastern nations to normalize relations with Israel. Is that accurate?
Senator, yes, that is accurate. And Morocco has a great deal of influence. It really considers itself as a North African country, and that will be one of the things I will work on, if confirmed.
Yes, sir. Given the reality we've seen in the last 2 years of the implementation and expansion of the Accords, maybe you could speak with a little more specificity as about the role they might have in the political and economic development of the region.
Sure, Senator. I think the next phase here really is to translate the agreements that have been made into actual benefits that people can feel. So that these aren't just abstract agreements sitting out there which are, negotiated in fancy rooms, but actually translate into benefits, economic, first and foremost, things that transform society and make them, improve them. People-to-people ties, which Morocco is really a leader on. You now have tourism booming between the two countries. Of course, there's a historic and longstanding Jewish community, which is very much recognized as part of the fabric of Morocco, which stands as one of the pillars in that relationship. And there are maybe 500,000 Israelis of Moroccan descent, perhaps more. So that's one dimension of it. But to the extent that that you can show benefits on the economic front, commercially, in terms of other standards of living that start to rise in the region because of this, I think you will have a bandwagoning effect that will just bolster moderates across the region.
Thank you, sir. Before I move on to Mr. Hood for a short question, I just wanted to speak to the effort to counter China through your role, Mr. Talwar. I commend the work of the embassy and consulate in partnering with Morocco to advance our security and economic priorities. With the 15th anniversary of our free trade agreement, Morocco continues to be a strong partner in the region. Confronting economic aggression from countries such as China requires robust partnerships and a sound strategy. How should the United States continue to engage Morocco to counter China in North Africa, sir?
Thanks very much for the question, Senator. If confirmed, this will be a high priority for me. China is beginning to make inroads in that region, including in Morocco, and I think we have to keep a very close eye on that. Morocco does not have a comprehensive strategic partnership with Morocco, which is their highest level of relationship that they will bestow upon some of the countries. Nonetheless, China has been active, particularly in the cultural space. They have 3 Confucius Institutes. They've been training people through Huawei academies. We actually do more than they do in terms of Cisco being involved there, training a lot of Moroccans. We've also been doing a lot of work recently through the Development Finance Corporation. That is one of the most effective tools that we have to counter the Chinese approach, which of course is very state-centric, very non-transparent. They're beginning to move into areas, for example, joint ventures they've proposed in R&D, vocational training, things of that sort. And I think that we have to be active early on and using the tools that Congress has provided to be able to work effectively against them.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned the Development Finance Corporation. I, of course, am in the presence of one of the founding fathers of that effort. That would be Senator Coons for the C-SPAN 2 cameras. I'm also glad you mentioned our private sector partners. So thank you so much. Mr. Hood, just a final question for you, sir. Seeing many parties boycott of the referendum on President Said's constitutional amendment, it appears Tunisia's democratic institutions are at risk. If confirmed, how would you urge President Said's administration to be responsive, transparent, and accountable to the Tunisian people?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. First, I'd like to thank Chairman Menendez, Ranking Member Risch, Chairman Meeks, and Ranking Member McCall for the statement that they made yesterday, which was very helpful. I'll read just part of it here. The United States will continue to support the Tunisian people and encourage efforts to return to a transparent and inclusive system of democratic governance. We urge President Said to work constructively with all Tunisians and the state of emergency and take steps to restore Tunisia's separation of powers, democratic institutions, and the rule of law. If confirmed, I would continue these efforts, not just through private meetings, but also through our public support to civil society voices. One of the things that's unique about Tunisia in the region is that it has a very vibrant civil society, and I think that's thanks due in large part to support from the United States and from other partners, and we would continue this because the voice of the people ultimately in a democracy, and especially in Tunisia, are the biggest levers on executive power. And so, if confirmed, that's what I would focus on.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all once again, for your commitment to serving our great country. I thank your families, some of whom, family members are present, and I'll look forward to doing some good together. I'm off to cast an important vote for a China competition bill. So, Mr. Chairman?
And I appreciate the ranking member's recognition of my hard work with then Chairman Corker on the DFC. I just want to congratulate you, Senator Young, on very hard work on a critical piece of legislation that is about to be voted into law. that is the single best thing we can do to strengthen American competitiveness and innovation, to prepare us to succeed in our global competition with China, and to make a stronger and more creative nation likely for the next generation. So congratulations on what is a landmark piece of legislation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I now look forward to one round of questions at the conclusion